It's week 16. That means there are 2 weeks of the regular season left. We'll run you through the fixtures and the results. We'll get Sue's. It's week 16. That means there are 2 weeks of the regular season left. We'll run you through the fixtures and the results. We'll get Sue's picks, which have gone off the rails in recent weeks, and we'll also speak with Cian Fahey. But our first guest as ever on the show this week is Sam Monson, all the way from the PFF headquarters in Cincinnati. Sam, how you doing?
Doing good, Jared. How about you?
Yeah, perfect. It's Christmas time. You managed to get Thanksgiving off this year. Does that mean you have to work Christmas Day and day after? Is that how that works in America?
Christmas Day, I think I get off. Every other day around Christmas and New Year is basically in the office still. But Christmas Day, I think I've escaped this year. It's the games have fallen on a nice schedule for Christmas Day escape.
They played a Christmas Day game last year, did they? Is that like a... Yeah. I thought it was only the NBA, but actually the NFL do it as well.
No, it's been bad the past couple of years, and then this year we're kind of moving. This year is the first year where it's moved to the point where Christmas Day is actually escapable.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Some very interesting storylines emerging from last week and ahead of this week's games. But I did want to ask you about something that you were talking about on Twitter over the last 24 hours or so. It's a new stat that you're developing, which is successful pass rush that would have been successful if that quarterback wasn't so damn quick at throwing the ball.
Yeah, it needs a catchy name. We've kind of had this in the system for a while. You know, we record sacks, we record hits, we record hurries, but those are all plays that actually materially impact the quarterback. So they're actual pressure plays, because all of those things are important. How a quarterback played under pressure, how he played from a clean pocket. These are vital distinctions to be made. But then we were thinking, there's all these plays where, you know, a pass rusher completely kills his blocker, but the ball comes out and the quarterback never feels it as pressure. Now, you want to reward the pass rusher for beating his guy because it's an important play and it's predictive going forward. You know, a guy that consistently wins his block one-on-one is going to win them going forward. It's an important thing to be measuring, but you can't record it as pressure because the quarterback never has any idea it happened. So if you put all those down as pressures, it's just hurries, you would start warping those pressure statistics. So we've just been recording them in the system, and they just live in our database as a thing called BDs, and that's it. But I need a name. I need a better name for these things than, you know, play wins where it would have become pressure, but the quarterback got rid of the ball, etc. So I put out a little poll on Twitter. I think the two front runners were wins without pressure, WWPs, or non-pressure wins, so NPWs. Those are the two front runners, and they both suck, let's face it. So if anybody has any actual good suggestions, I'm all ears. Yeah,
some of your Twitter followers are pretty filthy, but also quite funny at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's the niche I'm going for with my Twitter, so I think it's worked well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is important, though, because this is one of those stats that lets you evaluate how well players are playing without it actually showing up on the stat line up to this point. You know, the unseen work, as they would call it in the olden days in rugby before the stats started to catch up, and it was like, oh, he actually hits a load of rucks, makes a number of tackles, all that kind of stuff. And rugby is miles and miles and years and generations behind American football when it comes to the collection of these stats. But who's showing up? Is it the names that you would expect to be showing up?
Yeah, largely. I mean, Aaron Donald, this is the first statistic that I was able to find, basically pass rushing this year, where Aaron Donald wasn't number one. He was number two, and he was a distance ahead of number three. But Myles Garrett, the Cleveland Brown edge rusher, was actually the number one guy in terms of winning these blocks without generating pressure on the play. And you're right, it's important because I think this, as much as anything else, will be predictive in spotting guys that don't necessarily have 15 sacks in a season. Because, you know, sacks is a nice thing, but it's ultimately a terrible way of measuring pass rush, because you're talking about the difference between 10 and 15 plays over like 1,000 snap sample size over a season. It's just a minuscule percentage of a guy's play. Even if you just limit it to pass rush, it's such a small percentage. You add in hurries, you add in hits, you increase the sample size, and all this does is increase the sample size even more. It's factoring in more plays, and obviously the more of those positive plays you have, the better a player you're going to be ultimately.
So Myles Garrett's number one?
Yeah, Myles Garrett number one in terms of these plays. Aaron Donald number two. Cameron Jordan, I think, from the Saints was number three.
Okay, the other thing is that a lot of sacks will actually be the result of pressure coming from one side, and the quarterback runs away from that pressure into somebody else. That person gets the sack number, even though you might have been running away from Myles Garrett, and you might have run into somebody on the other side, and that other side of the Browns defence probably wasn't that good, but ends up getting a half sack or a sack for that.
Right, this is another reason that sacks are just a bad way of measuring total pass rush, and it's why, PFF leans on the grading system. As much as we like to use numbers to support what the grades say, the grades give you this kind of context, right? Because not all sacks are created equal. Sometimes a sack is beating two guys at the line of scrimmage, splitting a double team, and making a really fantastic play. And sometimes a sack is you are actually getting blocked at the line of scrimmage, but somebody else got really quick, impactful pressure, and you just happened to be standing there when the quarterback ran past you, grabbed him, and took him to the ground. Now, you get the same sack, you get the same stat as the guy that made the fantastic play the play before, but it's clearly not the same play. It's materially less impressive. So the grading would differentiate between those two. The sacks won't.
I'm also, before you told me that Aaron Donald finished second, I was about to go, well, I presume Aaron Donald doesn't actually appear very high up this list, because obviously it's almost impossible for you to beat the two people in the middle that he has to beat. Like the pressure, I would have thought the pressure that he tends to get comes from blowing things up in the middle as opposed to, but obviously that's wrong. How does he beat people and it not end up resulting in pressure on the QB?
It's basically quick passes, where there's, it's a three-step drop, it's turn, throw the ball. It's an immediate sort of quick pass situation with a quarterback, let's say he catches the ball, turns to his right, throws a bubble screen, but on the backside of the play, Aaron Donald has been one-on-one with the three technique, and the three technique is face down on the floor by the time the quarterback is throwing the ball. Now, if that play is anything other than a bubble screen, Aaron Donald is getting pressure almost immediately, but because the ball's out of his hands before he even knows what's happening, Donald doesn't get credit for the play. So yeah, you're right, though. It should minimize the number of plays where that happens for Donald, and that's why this is like the only pass rushing statistic anywhere where Donald is second instead of first. But he's so good, there's still enough of these plays where he's not getting the credit he would deserve otherwise.
How does he do that? Is it movement of feet? Is it like so? I'm unfamiliar with how much you're allowed to touch between the shoulders. Is it? If you're on the line of scrimmage, you're allowed to attack your opponent basically in the chest.
If you're a defensive lineman, you can pretty much get away with anything. Offensive linemen, they try to restrict guys to blocking within the frame of the body. So if you picture this body as a rectangle here, if you're within the frame, they tend to get away with it. So you can latch on and hold here, and it usually won't get called. But if you hold and your hand is out here on the side, that's when they start to call it as holding. And the offensive linemen don't get away with that. Defensive linemen, you can pretty much get away with whatever you want, as long as you're not actively sort of holding in a defense or an offensive lineman when the flow is going away from you and you're pulling this guy back towards you. That's really the only time a defensive lineman is going to get called for holding. But otherwise, he can do pretty much whatever he wants. And when you watch Donald, it's just this incredible blend of quickness, power. He's really good with his hands at sort of swiping away the hands of offensive linemen. When they go out to punch him like this, he's really good at swiping both those hands away and then shooting the gap to the left or the right of those guys. The PFF grading, again, differentiates essentially between the severity of how well he beat his guy. And we've got these plays, these plus 1.5 grades, the best grades we do. And if you put on the highlight reel of his plus 1.5 plays, it's absolutely absurd. There was one play against the Minnesota Vikings left guard Tom Compton where he actually, when he goes to make his initial punch, to make contact on Aaron Donald, he's actually in perfect position. And if you freeze framed it at that point, you would say there's no way Aaron Donald is winning this play, or at least not anytime soon. And in this immediate movement of swiping his hands to the side and dipping and shooting around him, in a fraction of a second, literally a split second, he has gone from perfect position to completely screwed on the play, and Donald is through and bearing down on the quarterback, ends up tossing Kirk Cousins to the ground. There's nobody else in the NFL that can do that with the speed and the quickness and the reliability that Donald has. It's unbelievable watching him do it. Was it
a cert that he was going to be this good a player coming out in the draft? Was it fairly obvious to anybody with a brain that he was going to turn into the player he is now?
He's 1 year ahead of the start of PFF college grading. So one of our projects, I think, would be really fascinating to go back and grade his final season and see if his PFF grading was this astonishing. Anecdotally, from just kind of watching him as a prospect, he was a really, really good college player who was, I think, this dominant at the college level. But the knock on him was he was 285 pounds. And this was at a time where everybody thought defensive lineman, 3 techniques, you needed to be over 300. If you weren't 300 plus pounds, you just couldn't hack it in the NFL, where offensive linemen are 330 pound guards, and you just don't have the bulk to be able to deal with that. I think Donald is probably going to prove to just have been so good that it didn't matter. And when you look at how he wins, so much of it is he's really good with his hands, and very rarely does he allow a guy who outweighs him by 50 pounds to just lock on and drive him off the line of scrimmage. He's so good at using his hands to shed those blocks that you very rarely see the inertia difference, the inertia disadvantage that he has by being outweighed by 50 pounds, just overcome how good he is at everything else.
I just was Googling there to see where he ended up being picked. He was picked 13th, so it's not a nailed on. I would say there's loads of people who have been picked 13 who have not got anywhere near the career that he has. So obviously a lot of teams just had so many doubts. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that one of the few things that the 49ers fans have left was hope that they were going to get the first pick, and now that's gone. And so Bosa's off the cards, and you're like, okay, well, Khalil Mack wasn't actually drafted number 1 in his draft. Jadeveon Clowney was drafted number 1 in his draft. And, I'm not saying that there's an Aaron Donald falling to 13 these days, because probably your scouting system absolutely helps make sure that doesn't happen anymore. But at the same time, the draft is a bit of a lottery still. So first, second, third pick, no guarantees anywhere here.
It is, absolutely. You're going to get, all pro players all the way down the draft. Always. And you're certainly going to get them beyond the first pick. I don't think we're ever going to be in a situation where you require the number 1 overall pick to get the best player in the draft. With the only exception being when that is obviously a quarterback, because those guys are probably going to go at the top, and just it's going to work out that way. But, the best player in the draft is often taken somewhere in the middle of the first round. And even outside of Nick Bosa, who we think is the best player in this draft, there's nothing to say that a guy like Alabama's Quinnen Williams, their defensive interior stud, if he declares, or if he comes out this year, that he won't be the best player in the draft. He's got phenomenal PFF grades as well. And, sometimes certain situations, or whether these guys develop a little bit more, you could easily get those guys lower down.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Pro Bowl nominees, not the nominees, the actual, they are nominees at this point. They're the ones who are going to the Pro Bowl. The results are out, and, you start looking down I was going to say the San Diego Chargers, but the LA Chargers ended up with the highest number of players, and their drafting over the last 4 or 5 years has been really good. It's like finally everything has come together, and we were chatting about this in the office earlier on. I was like, oh, they've come from nowhere, one of the lads was saying, and I was like, really all they did was add a kicker this year to the results last year, and maybe if they'd had a kicker last year, they might have won about 10, 12 games and been really good.
Right, and also stop getting decimated by injuries. I mean, the Chargers have been talented for a lot of years, and usually by mid-December, they're just a shell of the roster that began the season, and they've been completely wrecked by all these injuries. This year, that hasn't really happened. They lost Hunter Henry at the start of the year, their tight end, unless you listen to Stephen A. Smith, in which case he's still going. But they lost him. We thought that was going to continue this curse on the Chargers, but actually they haven't been that banged up this year, and they're better because of it. And like you said, they added the kicker. I think they've actually been screwed out of a couple of positions on the Pro Bowl. A guy like Desmond King, their slot corner, could easily have gone to the Pro Bowl as well. He's been phenomenal this year. But yeah, I think this roster has been good for a number of years, and a few different things are starting to come in place this year that haven't happened in the past couple of years. And they're very real contenders this year. That, the game against Pittsburgh, the game against Kansas City at Arrowhead, those were big, I think, seminal kind of moments for this Chargers team in terms of building a mindset that could win a Super Bowl.
Well, the Arrowhead game in particular, because Keenan Allen goes out really early in that game, and Melvin Gordon also goes out really early in that game, and you're like, okay, this is a team that can't really afford to lose those talents. So maybe Gordon was injured already, but the point being that they didn't have their full suite, and they fall behind to what looks like a fairly routine, okay, this is how these games go now. Everybody shows up, Kansas City roll over you. It might be 34-14 scoreline fairly early on, and you just accept that it's over. But there was a steeliness about them, which maybe that speaks to Rivers. Maybe that speaks to I don't know really what you would put that down to.
You're right. There really was. So I was kind of dealing with a cold at that time, and I actually went to bed at the start of the fourth quarter in that game, thinking it's done, it's over. Chiefs have won. As we go. Woke up the next morning. I was like, how the hell did the Chargers win this game? It did not look like it was happening at all. I had to go back and watch the final quarter and find out what happened. But you're right. That is a huge moment for them, because in the playoffs, there's a pretty good chance they might have to go to Arrowhead again, whether it's in the AFC Championship game or the divisional round, whatever. And they now know that they can go down against the Chiefs and come back. And I think in previous years, we've seen that happen to the Chargers, and they've just wilted. They haven't been able to sustain that. And there's this belief about them that we're okay. We can come back from these games. We're good enough to still be in this game, even if it's late. And the way defenses are in today's NFL, where everything is offense all the time, you don't need a good defense. What you need is a defense that can show up big for basically one drive. And that's what happened in that game. The Chargers just took this huge drive, took up a huge amount of the clock, and then they got one stop. The Chiefs went 3 and out, and they got the ball back, and that was how they were able to come back. And even that one stop was basically predicated on one play. They got a huge amount of penetration. They stuffed the run like 6 yards in the backfield, and the Chiefs weren't able to overcome, 2nd and 16 or whatever. So you don't need this fantastic defense on every single down. You just need a defense to be able to show up big in a critical moment and keep you in the game. And that's kind of what happened in that game. But I think you're right. The Steelers game, the Chargers game, those are big moments for this Chargers team, and a mindset to understand that they're not just a team that could win. They're a team that will win. And I think that's a big sort of shift.
Yeah, so you can see why they have so many players on the Pro Bowl. What else struck you about it? And two things, really. Is it as big a deal as it should be / seems? What's the general consensus about the role of the Pro Bowl within the NFL season?
Yeah, so the game itself is a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a joke. It's an end of season celebration type of game, and nobody really takes it seriously, and nobody plays particularly hard, and it's a bit of a mess in terms of the spectacle itself. But getting nominated to the Pro Bowl is still an important thing, because there are players with contract bonuses tied to Pro Bowlers. Significant money is tied up in this. It's not an insignificant thing that we should just not pay any attention to because the system is such a mess. Now, the system is such a mess. It's an absolute joke the way it comes about. It's devised by this sort of third system of a third of the vote is a fan vote, which obviously anytime you're getting the fans to vote on something, it's probably going to go awry. There's a third of the vote that is NFL coaches, and there's a third of the vote that's NFL players. Now, both the players and the coaches sound like they would be good ideas, but they're not. Particularly the players thing, when you talk to guys about how that works, it's different in every single team, so it's not like a universal system. Some of it is a complete mess. They vote like by units based on their own unit. They vote by units based on the opposition units. There's just not a good feel for how guys are actually playing on a league-wide basis. Yeah. And the same is true for coaches, because they know how their guys play. They know how their opposition plays. Outside of that, they don't have a particularly good handle on how other people are playing, because they don't have to deal with them on a daily basis. They don't have to grind their tape. They don't have to figure those things out. So really, those three things put together are like three flawed processes all rolled into one, and we end up with what we end up with. Now, the other issue with the Pro Bowl is that the actual position designations are broken. They're like 20 years out of date from this era where there was a tangible difference between a 4-3 defense and a 3-4 defense. And those guys played completely different positions. Now, the way the league has gone, everybody's playing nickel defense with 5 defensive backs on the field. Nobody's really playing base for more than a third of their snaps. And everybody's kind of in the same position. They're just in slightly different, whether somebody has his hand in the ground or whether he stands up. He's in the exact same technique with the exact same responsibilities. We're just calling him a different thing. So in the Pro Bowl, you have guys that literally play the same position, falling into different position designations, whether it's defensive end or outside linebacker. Yeah. And the whole thing is just a disaster. Like, guys, so even the All-Pro is not immune from this. Khalil Mack made All-Pro at 2 different positions, not because they were celebrating his versatility, but because the ballot was broken and one guy basically put him down at the wrong spot. and he was a unanimous All-Pro at the first position and had like one spare vote to go in as the number 2 guy at a different position.
Yeah, so that doesn't make any sense. And so the difference between the Pro Bowl and the All-Pro, what's the All-Pro is the full, like, one team?
Yeah, the All-Pro is the Associated Press. Every year they put together like one team. The Pro Bowl is this vote system where it's a full roster, two full rosters, AFC and NFC.
Yeah.
And they get put together for an actual game. The All-Pro is just a first team and a second team designation given by the Associated Press. And it is, to be fair to it, it's got its own problems, but it's dramatically better than the Pro Bowl in terms of accuracy and how guys are actually playing. But there are some pretty egregious screw-ups on the Pro Bowl. It's often done hugely by reputation and not how guys are actually playing.
Yeah, and also they have a fullback in the team, which means Kyle Juszczyk gets in every year, which is like...
Yeah.
All right, okay. I'm sure he is the best fullback, but like one of the last 3 in the league, so you know the competition isn't very intense.
It's kind of a throwback to the fact that it's 20 years out of date when fullbacks were on the field every single down, and now those guys aren't. You should, realistically, you should have another wide receiver out there because those are the guys that play more than fullbacks do. Basically, nobody runs with a fullback.
I've been hearing a lot about the time of year and the impact that the weather is having on particular teams and players, and it's a fairly easy knock to make against the Californian-born quarterbacks and the ones who are playing in California at the moment in particular, and I'm thinking of one as opposed to Philip Rivers, that this weather, things don't go so well, suddenly the Rams aren't the same team, and we should now be looking for a team who has a mix of defence and offence and preferably has some cold weather ability for the month of January. Is this overstating things just a little bit too much and definitely infecting ourselves with a bit of recency bias?
I think so. And we've seen it with other teams as well. Some teams are just starting to struggle in December. I don't think it's necessarily a weather thing. The Saints have been struggling inside as well as outside. It's it's not like the Saints have just run into a bunch of cold weather blizzard teams and suddenly the wheels have come off that juggernaut offense the way it seems to have with the Rams. So I think we've just reached the point where teams are starting to wobble a little bit come December, and the weather, it's obviously a factor, and it's just an easy thing to start pointing at and saying this is the solution to everything. I do think though that it's the weather can definitely be a factor that influences these teams that rely more on defense than other teams. So that's why home field advantage is important for a team like the Saints or the Rams, and it's something that could propel a team like the Chicago Bears to be much more of a contender than they looked otherwise. Because if a team has to go through Chicago, and you've got a defense that today's NFL, it's very hard for a defense to be consistently the thing that's winning you games. It's very, very difficult for that. But they can be a thing that wins you one game. But then if you add in the weather where it impacts both offenses overall, now suddenly your defense is getting a boost in addition to being a pretty good unit in the first place. So suddenly you magnify the impact that the Bears defense, say, could have in the postseason if they get the benefit of the weather as well impacting offenses. So yeah, I think it's a little bit simplistic to basically say, any of these hot weather teams are going to struggle in the cold, and we should be looking at these cold weather teams as the new Super Bowl favorites. But I think it's real to look at it and say a team like Chicago could get a significant boost out of cold weather if they get that in addition to their defensive strengths already.
Yeah, that's why the Rams need to get back to winning ways really quickly, just to make sure that I don't know if they can regain a home field advantage the rest of the way through. But their form has just hit a wobbly patch on both sides of the ball at precisely the wrong time. That's beginning to just introduce a bit of doubt where previously there had been complete certainty about the coach, the quarterback, and I mean, probably a lot of this has to do with the fact that Gurley's playing through an injury at the moment.
Yeah, and I think teams have started to figure out, for a long time it was Sean McVay is this offensive wizard and he's doing things that nobody else is able to combat. I think teams have just figured out slowly, okay, now we know what to do. We just start dropping guys into coverage, we flood everything underneath, and we force them to play in front of us. And the Rams haven't adjusted yet. They haven't, countered what teams are doing to them on offense. So I've seen people suggesting that, like you said, Gurley's playing hurt, or teams have taken away the run game. They've taken away Todd Gurley, so suddenly the pass game is not functioning with all their play action. And I actually think it's the reverse of that. It's the teams have flooded the passing game. They flooded the coverage zones, and they're forcing them, or they're taking away that, and they're sort of saying to them, right, you beat us on the ground. And at the moment, the Rams haven't adjusted back in that direction. They haven't loaded Todd Gurley up and decided, okay, we're going to run the ball relentlessly down your throat with one of the best run-blocking offensive lines in the league, with Todd Gurley, and with these opportunities that you're presenting us. They still want to pass the ball, and they're just finding it harder to do that right now. So I think that the talent is obviously still there. The capability is still there. I think we're just starting to see teams figuring out how to defend at least plan A of the Rams so far, and they haven't yet adjusted to plan B. Now, that's the big question mark, is how long is it going to take them to do that, and what impact will it have when they actually finally get there? Yeah,
well, they've got some bright minds working on that, and so no doubt there will be some semblance of it emerging in the next couple of weeks. One final point to talk about is the situation that the Patriots find themselves in at the moment, where it looks like they're miles behind where they have been in previous seasons. They're still hanging around. There's still a good chance that they're going to have not that much by way of competition early in the playoffs, and they should be able to get through potentially a first game if they can just get players who have previously been very good to get back to something like the level they were at. If Edelman can make some catches on third down, we're used to seeing him make them that he didn't make last weekend. If Gronkowski is actually still a viable NFL player, then they could still yet be okay, but it's hard to have confidence in them the way things are going.
Yeah, I mean, the Patriots are still a good team. They still have the single biggest advantage of anybody, which is that Bill Belichick is a coach who thrives on singular game plans. And, once you hit the postseason, it's just a series of singular game plans. So he's not going to run into a situation like the Rams do, where teams have figured out how to stop what they do. Because every single game, Belichick and Brady are perfectly prepared to do something completely different if they believe that that's the best game plan to beat this particular opposition. So that still gives them a massive potential advantage when they hit the playoffs. The single biggest, I think, difference between this team and the last few years has been Rob Gronkowski, because he's on the field, but for the first time ever where he's been on the field and playing, he's just not the same guy. He's not anywhere near the same impactful player. He isn't the mismatch problem that he's been in the past, and he isn't able to single-handedly win games for this team because a defense can't deal with him the way they did in the past. He's been really struggling. Tom Brady is playing worse than he has over the past few years. Part of that is probably because his past few years' play has been absolutely absurd. He's been the best quarterback in the league by a distance, and that was probably inevitably going to come down to earth a little bit. But I think a big part of it is the Gronkowski factor, is that he doesn't have this guy who's just a complete mismatch freak who's able to take advantage of the entire time. But I think the other thing to look at was the Steelers have basically they've been chipping away at this mountain for years. The Patriots have been their Everest, and they've never been able to figure out what to do against them. And for a number of years now, they've taken a different swing at it every single time. They've gone completely different in terms of game plans, like the last 3 occasions they played them. And this time was the first time where I think they just went, you know what, nothing works, so we're just going to try a bit of everything. And on defense, they cycled through literally everything they had in their playbook. They went bracket coverage, they went man coverage, they went zone coverage, they went blitz, they went no blitz. They went through everything they tried to do over the past 4 times they played them. They rolled it all up into one game plan. And I think that actually was the thing that worked. It was showing the Patriots everything, not one thing over and over again. So I think we finally just kind of saw the Steelers actually hit on a game plan that would work against New England, the way New England have done every single time against, the Steelers or any other team they face. So I wouldn't read too much into this idea that the Steelers were able to finally beat them, because that's probably been coming for a while. The bigger concern for them is, how do they manufacture more offense without this incredible mismatch weapon in Rob Gronkowski?
Yeah, we're going to wait and see. As ever, Sam, great to have you with us. Thanks a million.
Cheers. Happy Christmas.
You too. Enjoy it. That's Sam Monson on the line from Cincinnati there for us. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Sam, and a great follow. Totally worth it if you're into your NFL, which I guess you are if you've got this far in the podcast. Going to speak with Cian in just a couple of minutes, and then we'll bring you Sue's picks as well. But we can run through last week's scores and this week's fixtures for you right now. So last week's scores, the final game that we were talking about, I didn't really get around to there, was the Saints and the Panthers 12-9 victory eked out on Monday night. And the first thing that we did talk about there, all the way back on Thursday, it seems like a long time ago now, the Chargers beat the Chiefs in an instant classic, going for two with basically the final play of the game and getting it for the Chargers on the road against the Chiefs, which when it was broken down afterwards makes perfect sense. Why the hell would you give the Chiefs the ball back with a chance to win the game with their offense? The Texans beat the Jets, routine enough on Saturday. Football's on Saturdays now, by the way. And then the Browns beat the Broncos 17-16 in a big game for Baker Mayfield and that team. Going to Denver, winning, showing that they're a real team, getting to, is it 7 wins? Is it 6 wins now with 2 games left to go? It is. Packers 17, Bears 24, big win for the Bears. The Bills beat the Lions to give them 5 wins on the season, which is a phenomenal achievement, a phenomenal result from that crappy team at the start of the year. And it looked like their coaching team was on the hot seat and they've probably given themselves another season. The Ravens beat the Bucks 2012. Not a great game, but another brilliant win for them. They definitely have their quarterback of the future too. The Falcons beat the Cardinals. Who cares? The Bengals beat the Raiders. Who cares? The Giants were shut out by the Titans. Again, what the hell are the Giants doing at this stage of the season? The Vikings beat the Dolphins 41-17. The Jags were beaten by the Redskins despite the fact that Jay Gruden was 0-14 or something ridiculous like that in games where his team had trailed at halftime, but they managed to find a way to beat the Jags. The Colts beat the Cowboys 23-0. Not a great look for Dallas when it looked like they had that division totally wrapped up. The 49ers ruined their draft pick, but found a way to beat the Seahawks for the first time in 11 attempts. The Steelers beat the Patriots, as we were talking about there, and then the Eagles overturned the Rams to give themselves a chance of still getting out of that division and into the playoffs with Nick Foles under centre. So this week's fixtures, we can run you through them now. Redskins at Titans, Ravens at Chargers are the 2 Saturday fixtures. So that's 9:30 Irish time and then the middle of the night Irish time. But the Ravens and Chargers are going to be a good game. The Redskins at the Titans, not so much. Bengals at Browns, Bucks at the Cowboys, the Vikings at the Lions, the Bills at the Patriots, the Packers at the Jets, the Texans at the Eagles, the Falcons at the Panthers, the Giants at the Colts, and the Jags at the Dolphins are the early kickoffs. Rams play the Cardinals. That's going to be one-way traffic. The Bears at the 49ers. You'd expect the Bears to win that one too. And then the late game is the Steelers at the Saints, which is definitely worth watching. That's your 9:25 full game, no red zone at that point. And then the Chiefs and the Seahawks is the middle of the night game, which also should be pretty good. And the Broncos at the Raiders. So without further ado, we can say good afternoon to Cian. Cian, how are you?
I think we're on the same page here, Jerry. I heard a lot of who cares about that game and who cares about that game at this point of the season. We're narrowing in on who's going to be in the playoffs at this point. Yeah,
and there are some really good games with, the whole truism of fights making styles. There's a couple of good defenses against a couple of good offenses. Up to this point, we had kind of been reaching the conclusion that defense matters less and less to the point of it doesn't matter at all. And then over the last couple of weeks, defenses were making a bit of a comeback.
Well, this past weekend in particular was kind of a weekend of teams not scoring many points, not scoring many touchdowns. And I know this because the fantasy community was harping on about it over and over again because it was a big weekend in fantasy football. I don't know if it's weather. I don't know if it's players getting hurt. I don't know if it's offenses getting beaten down a little. It's becoming a little bit more predictable. Teams have figured them out because they've played. Because they've played so many games at this point. But yeah, something happened last week and even the week before where things have slowed down a little bit. I don't anticipate that continuing. I imagine once the playoffs actually start, we'll see these high-scoring games come back again, and you'll have the best offenses in the league in those games. So there are certain teams I'm concerned about, like the Rams and probably the Bears a little bit, just because of their quarterback play. But I think the Saints will figure it out when they're at home. I think the Chiefs will be their dominant Chiefs that they are. I think the Chargers are a very good offense. The Steelers have the capability of being a very good offense, especially with Juju Smith-Schuster coming back playing well. So I'm not concerned about the scoring at this point.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about some of the specific games this weekend. We can talk about some of the teams you've mentioned there. Let's start with the Chiefs at Seattle. So Seattle should have won and clinched last week against the 49ers, but they were terrible and they were committing penalty after penalty after penalty. they believe there's some kind of conspiracy to keep the season alive and the match interesting. This game ends up getting flexed out to the late game, and the Seattle fans are all like, "Oh, that's the only reason we lost last week," as opposed to the fact that maybe their team isn't that good.
Inconsistent is a kind of a good way to put them, I guess, because they're built on narrow margins. They are a run-heavy, run-first offense that sets up the play-action pass and sets up the passing for... Like Russell Wilson, like it was a thing people said early in his career. I didn't want to say it because we hadn't seen him, but it does look like he's someone who needs to be the complementary piece in the offense. They need to run the ball before they pass the ball rather than have the pass set up the run, which is perfect for him right now because they've got Chris Carson who can work between the tackles, Mike Davis there who looks pretty good. You've got J.D. McKissick coming back. So they have enough talent there on offense to set Russell Wilson up for success. Defensively, like Bobby Wagner's phenomenal. Frank Clark is very, very disruptive. Then the secondary, you've got Bradley McDougall who's had a really good year. But outside of that, you've a lot of unproven young players. You've got guys who are going to be less consistent week to week because they haven't been in the league 3 and 4 and 5 years. Michael Kendricks just got hurt as well, so he was one of their proven veterans, although he'd been out for a lot of the year. He'd been suspended for a lot of the year. I do think this Chiefs-Seahawks game is going to be probably the best game of the weekend, so I'm glad it's in prime time, even though it's the middle of the night over here. It is a game that you will want to focus on, just because it's probably, if you went, like, the Chiefs might be the best team in football based on the Saints and Rams struggles over the past couple of weeks, even though they lost to the Chargers. And the Seahawks are an ascending team. So even though they're from different conferences and they're unlikely to play each other again unless they both make the Super Bowl, it's a bit of a fascinating matchup. Okay, so what's going to happen in it? If you're game planning from the Chiefs' perspective, how are you going after the Seahawks? Well, the Seahawks do the same thing pretty much all the time. They have their specific coverages they're going to play. And it's cover 3 heavy base when Earl Thomas was there. I think they've moved away a little bit from that, trying to not stress the free safety as much anymore, but they're still not a defense that's going to change things up a huge amount. So Andy Reid knows what he's going to go in there and do, and he's got a quarterback who, to me, has been very clearly the best quarterback in football this year, and a quarterback who, if he doesn't win the MVP, it's simply because we got bored of him at mid-season and had to go and find someone else to vote for instead. He has been outstanding, and I went through all of his snaps, all of his throws over the past week and a half, and charted every single one, and his accuracy to every level of the field is in the top 10 of every quarterback, it would have been based on last year's numbers. So that's a rare thing. I think Aaron Rodgers was just outside of that, and I think Drew Brees was the only person inside of that last year. And then he's taking care of the football very well. He's reacting to pressure brilliantly. The thing with Mahomes is, I think a lot of people are going to look at him and say, he's got this huge arm. We need a quarterback with a huge arm. You don't. The huge arm is kind of the cherry on top, I guess. It's kind of the thing that allows you for highlight plays. But he's really successful because he has an unbelievable control of that arm. He has an unbelievable accuracy, but he also has a foundation of a skill set where he does all the simple things very, very well. And he manages pockets very well. He reads defenses very, very well. So the Seahawks going into this game, if they're going to do what they always do, it feels like Andy Reid is going to know what to do and how to cut them apart. The only thing you would say is the Seahawks have played very well at home. Sammy Watkins is still banged up. The running game, and with the running back in the passing game as well, hasn't been as effective since Kareem Hunt has gone out. So it'll be an interesting matchup. I expect the Chiefs to win, but just because it's on the road, it's late in the year, you can't really bet on these things. Yeah, no, exactly. The Chiefs are -2.5 in that game, and I haven't a clue what's going to happen either. I just wasn't very convinced. I saw a good bit of the Seahawks last week, and it just, like, sometimes their wide receivers make amazing plays, but they always seem to be stretching just beyond where they should have been having to stretch to get the ball. Anyway, it's a ball placement issue with Wilson that he's had for quite a while at this point. Yeah, I mean, it does result in spectacular catches. Several of them also get blown up when they come down. You know, not quite defensive, but. The interesting thing about that is, earlier in Wilson's career, he was probably one of the best in the league at placing the ball perfectly for the receiver. And since then, he's developed this little bit of an elongated throwing motion where his elbow's dropping a little bit further. The ball's going like a windmill rather than just snapping out. And that's leading to those little inaccuracies. Okay, can you fix that? Yeah, it's not something you should need to fix because it should never regress like that. But it's just, for some reason, whatever reason, that's the way he's played. Okay, let's talk about the Ravens at the Chargers, because it's probably a more pronounced version of defense first now running team in the Ravens, because since they've got rid of Joe Flacco, they have a completely different offense. And the Chargers, I mean, you can definitely make the case that the Chargers are the best team in football with talent all over the field, and finally a kicker who doesn't bottle it every time he's asked to kick. So look, this is definitely one of the outstanding games of the weekend. Yeah, and I think the Chargers deserve a huge amount of credit, and they could very easily be the best team in football. At the moment, we have a little bit of a ambiguity up there just because teams that we thought were the very best struggled over recent weeks. But I kind of focus on the Ravens. I'm more fascinated with the Ravens in this matchup, and I'm more fascinated with the Ravens in the AFC as a whole because it feels like Lamar Jackson is just the perfect quarterback for that team. Defense, like you just mentioned it, defensively they can match up to anyone. They can beat you at any level. CJ Mosley is getting all the credit, or is not getting any of the credit right now. Bobby Wagner is getting all the celebration, but he's basically Bobby Wagner 2.0. He's phenomenal in space. He's aggressive blitzer. He's great in run defense. He can cover anyone you want. If you put him on Travis Kelce, Kelce's going to beat him a couple of times, but he's not going to routinely beat him the way he does everyone else in the league. And then in the secondary, Eric Weddle is one of the smartest safeties in the league. That's going to be kind of an interesting thing here because Phillip Rivers and Eric Weddle were teammates for a very, very, very long time. And that free safety quarterback dynamic where the safety is always reading the quarterback's eyes, the quarterback is always concerned with where the safety is and how he's going to manipulate him, move him away from certain receivers, move him into certain spots. Eric Weddle is going to know every single thing that Phillip Rivers likes to do. And conversely, Phillip Rivers is going to know every little tendency that Eric Weddle has. So that's going to be, like if you want to boil the defense-offense matchup down even further from just the two teams going against each other, Weddle versus Rivers is going to be fascinating. And it's one of these games where I wish the NFL had that camera for the live games where you had it pulled back a little bit and you could see the safeties all the time.
Yeah, you've got to wait to get the all 22 coaches' camera for that. So what's going to happen in this game?
Look, I think it's going to be all about how fast Rivers can get the ball out without letting Weddle take advantage of him because Suggs is going to be in the backfield. The whole defensive front seven is going to be in the backfield. If you go back to that Chiefs game last week, Phillip Rivers probably could have been intercepted 3 or 4 times, but I still wouldn't say he had a bad game necessarily because he was covering for his offensive line the whole time. Their left guard got beaten by Chris Jones pretty much every single play. The only time he had a comfortable drive was late in the game, the second last drive of the game, I believe it was, where Chris Jones was on the sideline dealing with a little injury. So if you have that offensive line in front of Rivers, yeah, he's going to get the ball out and attack tight windows and throw the ball phenomenally well because that's what he does. But that's a very difficult thing to do when you've got guys like Mosley and Weddle freelancing around the middle of the field and you've got cornerbacks outside. Like Marlon Humphrey had a great game last week. He's really emerging at this point now as well. A former high draft pick who's, I think he's in his 3rd year. He's still not an established player necessarily. So he's kind of still developing and still establishing himself. But his last couple of months in this season have been really, really impressive too. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the situation at Tennessee. We've been talking about Tennessee on and off just kind of as one of those teams. It's interesting to watch the evolution of them, and they're one of those teams who reached the playoffs last year but sacked the coach anyway, moved things on because they wanted to progress. And it seems like over the last 2 weeks they've realised that giving the ball to the big lad is not a bad idea. Derrick Henry, 6 touchdowns in 2 games and the 8th or 9th highest 2-game yardage record in NFL history. Is this a trend? Is 2 games enough to say, ooh, you found a guy here who might be a useful part of your offense?
It's an interesting one. I think that game last week was kind of fascinating in that Mariota opened and made a couple of outstanding plays that were ruined by wide receivers, and then you saw the limitations of the offense as a whole where they tried to do an end around to Tajay Sharp, who was a slow possession receiver, doesn't have the ability to explode into space, and Taywan Taylor had dropped passes that were thrown to him. So then they were kind of forced a little bit to rely on the running game, forced a little bit to rely on Derrick Henry. But I don't really blame the coaching staff there. I don't, like, if you've gone through Derrick Henry's career, he has never been someone who has made the most out of his touches. To be honest, he's been a net negative player for them prior to last week ago, or 2 weeks ago, that game against Jacksonville where he exploded. The difference between him right now is not necessarily style of running. It's that now he's hitting contact and he's being violent. He's being aggressive. He's running straight and going at defenders. In the past, he had this 250-pound body who could run as fast as Chris Johnson, who could make any movement you wanted him to make, but he would get near a defender and he'd move sideways or he'd go down instantly. Now he's running like he's a little bit angry, like the trade rumors pissed him off. And you could see it on these 2 touchdowns against the Jets where the first one is a run right up the middle, breaks 2 arm tackles, gets straight into the end zone. That's a perfect play from him, did exactly what he was supposed to do. Second touchdown, they isolate him on the edge against the cornerback. That's a matchup where Derrick Henry has to win every single time. But in the past, Derrick Henry would have got to the matchup, tried to shake him a little bit, then been hesitated, been uncertain, moved sideways, and it's very easy for even a cornerback to tackle you if you're stationary. Similar concept in rugby, then, or similar concept in gaff. Someone's standing still, it's very easy to look after them.
Yeah.
So in this game, he gets isolated on the cornerback on the edge, plants his foot once, goes straight up, passes inside shoulder, cornerback may as well not be there. Because when you're Derrick Henry size, moving at Derrick Henry speed, the only person who's going to stop you is you. And that's what he's figured out over the last couple of weeks. Hopefully it sustains. I think it can sustain because it's all about him, but it's just that mindset and that. Like Brandon Jacobs is kind of the comparison here. Brandon Jacobs was a New York Giants running back, huge guy, great physical traits. Same, he played as part of a backfield that I think had 2 or 3 other guys who ended up having 1,000-yard seasons. And he was very inconsistent too. So he would have 3 or 4 game stretch where he was great, 3 or 4 game stretch where he was bad. And it was all because of that mindset. Like, they can't all be Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if this is a transformative thing or just a weird streak that, looks anachronistic in the history books in years to come. Let's talk about Mitch Trubisky and the Bears at the moment. You say he's still a concern. Is it just a health concern or is it just his efficiency generally?
Well, it's still performance. I was trying to zone in on this because he's been one of the most fascinating storylines in the league this year to me. Obviously, his numbers are way better, and the Bears as a whole are way better, but that's because of Khalil Mack and the defense. And it's in this offense that everyone loves, with Tariq Cohen making great plays. Allen Robinson's emerged a little bit. We've talked about that previously. But still, the accuracy is just not there. He opened in this game and he's missing throws he should make, and he's just putting the ball in wrong places a lot of the time. But then he makes some spectacular throws as well. The big key I noticed in this past week was his timing is off. He's releasing the ball either a half second late or a half second early. And that's a scheme thing. So that's the one area where you can say, hey, he just needs more time in this offense. If you go back to Matt Ryan in his first year with Kyle Shanahan was missing throws over and over and over again because his timing was off. He comes back in his second season, he looks like he wins the MVP. They go to the Super Bowl. He's one of the best seasons an NFL quarterback is ever going to have. There's your hope for Trubisky. But that's not going to be until next season. Right now, he still looks lost. And for me, if you go up against, like, it's a less of an issue now, but if you go into New Orleans and you have to play Drew Brees and that offense, you assume Drew Brees is going to play and perform in a big game at home, even though he struggled on the road. Yeah. You can assume that with Trubisky at this point. Except
playoffs do weird things, right? So, I'm just thinking Nick Foles here. When Carson Wentz goes down last year, it's did they get shut out in the game, or was it 3 points or 6 points they scored? The defense is so amazing that they actually didn't lose. They weren't completely annihilated. The next game he's no good, and then they get into the playoffs. And the playoffs against Atlanta is a complete fluke that they managed to get out of that game. Like, there is a pathway for this season for him still to be just good enough so that he's not a net negative and the Bears can go on and win this thing.
Absolutely. This is why people love the NFL in America, and this is why people always believe their team has a chance in the NFL in America, because it's one game samples, it's one game off. The Falcons should have beaten the Eagles last year. Like in that game, was it the wild card round or division round? I can't remember which. Regardless, they should have lost that game. Foles threw the ball straight to a deep safety in the middle of the field, had a walk-in touchdown going the other way, and it bounced off his hands, went to Torrey Smith in the middle. Torrey Smith gained another 20 yards after it, and that set them up to win a low-scoring game. That happened because they have the Eagles offense around him and the Eagles defense that was phenomenal. So Trubisky's in that situation a little bit. He's better than what Foles was last year, probably less consistent than what Foles was last year. Yeah, any of these 12 teams that get into the playoffs have a chance of winning it. When I'm talking about this and saying this team is going to be better than this team, it's about probabilities. We can't say for certain because you don't get a 6 and 7 game series the way you do in the NBA.
Yeah, and that is totally why it's great and why bad teams can get good really quickly. Like the Bears were a complete joke 3 seasons ago, and now here they are, and it's a very legitimate thing for everybody to be thinking that they have a really good chance of winning.
I think it helps to have Khalil Mack.
It definitely helps. I mean, maybe you wouldn't give him away again if you were John Gruden. Maybe
probably not.
Although, look, if they finish as the worst team in football, that's also one of the benefits of the trade. It's not just the pick they get from Chicago, it's that their team is so crap now that everybody beats them, and that's why they're getting the first pick. So you could argue that technically the benefit of giving away Khalil Mack isn't just Chicago's pick, which could be the 32nd pick, but it also helps you get the first one. So, that's what his people in the pub would be doing after everybody goes out to them. So, briefly, some quick words about the Texans looking okay and the Patriots look bad.
Yeah, this Patriots game, man. Like the Patriots with Tom Brady at least, have in general gone into Pittsburgh and just torn Pittsburgh apart, torn the Steelers apart. And man, that was not what happened on Sunday. And the big concern is every part of their team looks bad right now. Well, it's not bad, maybe. Every part of their team is underperforming right now. Brady is obviously not where he has been before. The offensive line was giving up holding penalties and getting beaten in blocks too often against the Steelers front seven. That's good, but it shouldn't be that problematic that it was. The wide receivers, Josh Gordon had a drop. Julian Edmond had a drop. James White had a drop as he's running back, but he's basically a wide receiver. And then you switch it over to the defensive side. Whenever they rush 4, they don't get pressure consistently. And it's oftentimes not just that they don't get pressure, it's that the quarterback has as much time and space as he wants, which is different from just not having anyone coming free. So you combine that as a pass defense with a running defense where if you just shift the ball. So the Steelers opened that game in shotgun and they would toss the ball to the running back outside. And they were doing that because they wanted to force the defensive front 7 to move laterally. As soon as you do that, they're so slow and so unable to react to the offense that they give up these big running lanes. So they were missing James Conner. They obviously don't have Le'Veon Bell, and the Steelers are still able to run the ball on them. The only consistent strength that the Patriots have right now is their secondary, and you can attack their secondary because the front 7 doesn't help them enough.
The Texans?
It's just a fascinating team, really. It's built on big plays. It's built on just getting the ball to the DeAndre Hopkins. So when you play a team that doesn't double DeAndre Hopkins, you're able to have the game you had last week, where that game-winning drive at the end against the Jets was pretty much all DeAndre Hopkins. And then you come back and you play a team who's going to double-team DeAndre Hopkins, and Deshaun Watson suddenly has a lot to do. Demaryius Thomas still there is... Demaryius Thomas is a better receiver than a lot of starting receivers in this league, but he's not Demaryius Thomas anymore. It's not a mismatch anymore. Defensively is how they're going to win in the playoffs, I think. JJ Watt looks brilliant. David Clowney obviously is a dominant run defender, still needs to get better as a pass rusher, and their secondary has been excellent. So they're an interesting team. They're kind of, if we're just basing on the last couple of weeks, and I guess you can say the whole season for them, but if the last couple of weeks with the Patriots, I would probably be a little bit more optimistic about the Texans than I am about the Patriots.
All right. Cian, good stuff. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks, man.
It's Cian Fahey there. You can also follow him on Twitter, and you can subscribe to his Patreon as well. Sue is here. Sue, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
1 out of 3 last week for us.
Yeah.
That's a losing week, Sue.
I know.
It's costing people real, actual money.
I know. I'm 15 out of 25 in the year.
That's not bad. We're still up.
Well, yeah.
What?
I don't know. The last few weeks, I feel like the 49ers are this freak haunting team that come back all the time to me. Yeah. And it keeps going against. Good for you. But it keeps going against all of my picks. But this week, like before I came in here, I was like, I don't bet in this week, generally. If I don't, it's just not one of those weeks I bet on. I'm too scared to bet in it.
Yeah.
It's really unpredictable.
Last week was pretty unpredictable.
And people start to just go, you know what, we've won the division.
In retrospect, we didn't talk about this on the show last week. The Vikings sacked their offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Went to this Wunderkind who is apparently everybody else wanted. And they were playing Miami. Miami's form on the road was absolutely atrocious. Blah, blah, blah. The spread was tiny. We didn't take it.
What did they win by? 40 something?
It was
insane.
It was a blowout in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Actually, they almost let them back in. It went 21-14 at one point. But yeah, that was everything else.
In hindsight, I had a feeling about the Colts as well, and my other one was the Chargers, and I didn't go for it. I was kind of a bit scared to go for that one.
I mean, and rightly so.
I should have actually just put that down.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, any game where the cover comes through with the last play of the game, it's a bit fluky. Yeah, although it was an amazing game. This week, I'm scared, but the ones that I've picked are, I think the Falcons at the Panthers. I don't know why. Look, Cam is probably injured. I have this feeling that they might actually bench him for that in the end. Yeah.
Falcons are +2.5. It's on the road, but I don't know. The Falcons were great last week. They beat the Cardinals they were playing last week. It was huge.
Yeah, Cardinals were rubbish, but
the Cardinals are rubbish, and the Falcons haven't been great this season. But I still think they beat the. I think the Panthers are they look like they're just folding, and they're like, look, we'll come back.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that they don't play Cam, and it doesn't make any sense to play him. And at that point, it'd be... Is it Derek Anderson still there, QB? I'm not sure who their sub-QB is.
I'm not sure who they're...
at that point, you'd be getting 2.5 points, and it would be the full Falcons trying to win.
Yeah, and I think they'll do that. I think they'll do it by a field goal. They're going to do it. I have a feeling about the Eagles. The Texans are at the Eagles, and the spread is -2.5 for the Eagles at home. And there's a strong case that Foles should have just been in here all season, to be honest.
There isn't.
No, I will argue that to the end of time. I thought there was something about him towards the last few games. I thought he was brilliant in Super Bowl. I don't know. I don't know if I would have put Wentz in off the back of a pretty bad injury.
I think they probably should have given Wentz more time.
Yeah, it was a really bad decision, and now but he's going to be a free agent at the end of the season if he doesn't make an absolute miracle return here. But I'd say the Eagles will win this. I really think so.
Okay, so the Eagles are
-2.5.
-2.5 at home.
Yes.
Against the Houston Texans.
I don't think the Texans are all of that. I think they're good, but I don't think they beat the Eagles at home.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I think you might be right, but they could lose by a point.
Yeah, it could be a close game, but no, I have a feeling about that one. And the other one I have a feeling about is the Vikings at the Lions. The spread is -5.5 for the Vikings, even though they're on the road. But like we were saying last week, new offensive coordinator, they looked really exciting. I feel like we have a point to prove here, and we're going to prove it. And I kind of like them as a team. I just think they haven't got it together this year so far.
Yeah, I don't really like Kirk Cousins. There's banging, I don't know.
I'm over and back about him. Sometimes I watch him and like, oh, you're absolutely rubbish. How in God's name do you have a job? And then other times like, oh my God, he's actually really good.
There's a bang of David Brent off him in the NFL game day videos that you see. It's like...
You can't hold that against his game.
Well, I mean...
or a spread.
No, it's him as a... I'm like... I know, but yeah.
The rest of them I'm too scared to go near.
Some of these spreads are too big, I think. The
spread's massive on the Titans.
The Rams at the Cardinals is +14.
Yeah, and I like... I don't know about the Rams the last couple of weeks. They've just been a bit inconsistent.
Divisional game, no thanks. The Giants are getting 10 points at the Colts.
Yeah, like... No.
There's a chance that Odell Beckham Jr. is out for that game, and that didn't help last week, and they were...
Certainly didn't help last week.
Saquon. But the previous week, they were grand without him, and it was fine. And there was one other giant spread there, was there? Yeah, the Bills. The Bills +13 against the Patriots. Again, it's a divisional game. It's not like the cold weather in New England is going to somehow be breaking news to the Buffalo people.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like when the Patriots play the Bills, though, it's all demented. You're never really sure. Like, the Patriots could beat them by 3 or 4 touchdowns.
They could.
Or the Bills go... Like, it's just not a game I go near. Did the Bills beat them this year? Start of the season? I'm pretty sure they beat them week 1 or 2.
Good question.
I think they did. But
I thought the Bills beat the Vikings, and that was their first win. That was their first out of nowhere win.
I remember something about the Patriots and the Bills. Maybe it was from last season.
No, I haven't said that. The Titans. I think I'm going to take
the Titans last week.
The Titans -10.5. So that was your winning bet?
No, it wasn't. I didn't pick it. I had it. So I do a long list, and then I do my 3 that I kind of have a feeling about.
These are your locks.
Yeah, and I didn't pick the Titans. But I think that spread's too big against the Redskins, no?
The
defence isn't totally bad.
Who is their quarterback?
Nobody that we know.
It's Josh Jones.
It's our third pick.
Yeah.
Alex Smith has only been let out of hospital 2 days ago.
Flesh-eating virus or whatever it was. That doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah. No, I just thought that spread was too big, but I do like the Titans. And the Steelers at the Saints, there's a game that nobody knows what's going to happen. No, and I think that the Saints are way better than the Steelers. When is that game? Monday night? It's late. It's the late game. Yeah, it's not late on Sunday. Sorry, it's -5.5. Saints at home. I don't know.
5.5 is the type of thing you want to stay away from.
Yeah, no.
Give me a touchdown.
But it's an awful week.
All right, let's do good stuff.
Not really.
Your 3 are?
My 3 are Falcons on the road to the Panthers, and the Eagles -2.5 at home to the Texans, and the Vikings -5.5 on the road at the Lions.
From the Alf on the Shelf and from Colin Kaepernick. From me and Sue, happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.